Around 1000 BCE, something remarkable was happening in the Ohio River Valley. While most people in North America still lived in small, mobile hunting groups, the Adena people were building something different. They weren't the first to settle down, but they were among the first to leave massive, permanent marks on the landscape that we can still see today. The Adena culture emerged in what's now southern Ohio, northern Kentucky, western West Virginia, and parts of Indiana. These weren't isolated villages. This was a widespread cultural movement spanning over 200,000 square miles. The name Adena comes from the estate of Ohio Governor Thomas Worthington, where one of their major mounds was excavated in 1901. What makes the Adena remarkable is that they built these massive earthen structures without metal tools, without the wheel, and without domesticated animals for labor. Every basket of earth was carried by human hands. Archaeological evidence shows that a single large mound could contain over 60,000 cubic feet of earth. That's roughly 300,000 basket loads. Think about the organization, the planning, and the shared vision required to accomplish something like that. The Adena didn't appear out of nowhere. They evolved from earlier archaic period peoples who had been experimenting with more settled lifestyles for centuries. But the Adena took it further, creating the first true ceremonial centers in eastern North America. The Adena are best known for their burial mounds, but calling them just graves misses the point entirely. These were sacred spaces, ceremonial centers, and monuments to community identity. The largest Adena mound, Grave Creek Mound in Moundsville, West Virginia, stands 62 feet high and is 240 feet in diameter. When it was built around 250 BCE, it was the largest structure of any kind in North America. Here's how archaeologists believe they built these mounds. First, the Adena prepared the ground carefully, often burning the surface vegetation. They'd place the deceased, usually in a log tomb, in the center of the prepared area. Then came the remarkable part. The community would begin bringing basket after basket of earth, creating layers. But they didn't build these mounds all at once. Evidence shows that mounds were built in stages, sometimes over decades or even centuries. A mound might start small, covering a single burial. Years later, another burial would be added, and another layer of earth piled on top. This process repeated, creating what archaeologists call a staged mound. The layers tell a story. You can read the history of a community in the stratigraphy of their mounds. What did they bury with their dead? The Adena grave goods tell us about their beliefs and their connections to distant peoples. Copper bracelets and beads, the copper sourced from the Great Lakes region 500 miles away. Marine shell ornaments from the Gulf of Mexico, over 1,000 miles to the south. Gorges, which are ornamental stone pieces worn around the neck, often decorated with geometric designs or raptorial birds. Stone tablets with intricate carvings. Mica sheets from the Appalachian Mountains. The most intriguing items are the tubular pipes, some carved to look like animals or humans. These weren't just decorative. Residue analysis shows they were functional smoking pipes, though what they smoked remains debated. Some archaeologists suggest tobacco. Others think it might have been other native plants used in ceremonies. Not everyone got the same burial treatment. Some graves are simple, with few or no artifacts. Others are elaborate, filled with valuable trade goods and positioned in the center of large mounds. This tells us something important. Adena society had social hierarchy. There were leaders, probably religious specialists, individuals whose status was recognized by the entire community. In Adams County, Ohio, there's a quarter-mile-long earthen serpent winding along a cliff top. The Great Serpent Mound is one of the most enigmatic archaeological sites in North America, and we're still not entirely sure who built it or why. For decades, archaeologists attributed the Great Serpent Mound to the Adena culture. The dating seemed to line up, and Adena burial mounds exist nearby. But here's where it gets complicated. When researchers finally conducted radiocarbon dating in the 1990s on charcoal found in the mound, the dates came back around 1000 CE. That's almost 2,000 years after the Adena period. This would place construction in the Fort Ancients culture period. However, the debate isn't settled. Some archaeologists argue the charcoal might have been from later additions or modifications to an originally older structure. The mound has been restored multiple times since the 1800s, which could have contaminated the dating evidence. The mystery remains open. What we do know is what the mound represents. From above, it looks like an enormous snake, about 1,348 feet long, with 7 distinct curves and a spiraled tail. The head is aligned with the summer solstice sunset. Inside the open jaws of the serpent, or perhaps it's grasping something, is an oval shape. Some interpret this as an egg or the sun. The effort to build this was immense. Unlike burial mounds, the Serpent Mound contains no artifacts, no burials, no evidence of any practical purpose. It's pure symbol, pure expression of belief in cosmology. The builders excavated a trench, filled it with stones and clay, then covered it with a layer of earth and possibly sod to maintain the shape. Why a serpent? In many Native American traditions, serpents are associated with water, fertility, transformation, and the underworld. The serpent is a creature that moves between worlds. It lives in the earth, swims in water, and emerges into air. It sheds its skin and appears renewed. For a culture deeply connected to cycles of life, death, and rebirth, the serpent was a powerful symbol. Standing at the Serpent Mound today, you can't see the serpent shape from ground level. You have to climb the observation tower to see the full form. This raises a fascinating question. Who was the intended audience? The gods? The ancestors? Or was the act of construction itself the point? The community working together to create something sacred, regardless of whether anyone could see the final form? The mounds grab all the attention, but what about the other 99% of Adena life? These weren't people who spent their days building monuments. They were farmers, hunters, parents, craftspeople, living complex daily lives. The Adena were in transition between hunting-gathering and full agriculture. They didn't rely on corn that came later with cultures like the Mississippians. Instead, they cultivated what archaeologists call the Eastern Agricultural Complex. Indigenous North American plants like goosefoot, knotweed, maygrass, little barley, and sunflowers. They also grew squash and gourds. These crops provided carbohydrates and calories, but the Adena still hunted deer, elk, turkey, and gathered nuts, especially hickory and acorns, which were pounded into flour. Their settlements were typically small, maybe a few families living in circular houses made from wooden posts covered with bark or woven mats. These weren't permanent year-round villages in the way we usually think of them. Evidence suggests the Adena practiced seasonal mobility, spending summers in small farming communities near their fields, then dispersing in winter to hunting camps. The real social center wasn't the village, it was the earthworks. These were gathering places, ceremonial centers, where people from across the region would come together for rituals, burials, trade, and social bonding. This is a crucial point. The monuments weren't built by isolated communities. They required cooperation across multiple settlements, shared labor, shared beliefs. Adena material culture shows considerable skill. They made pottery, though Adena ceramics are generally plain and functional, thick-walled, flat-bottomed jars used for cooking and storage. They wove bags, baskets, and textiles from plant fibers. The preservation of textiles in some burial mounds shows they understood complex weaving techniques, creating patterned fabrics. They worked stone expertly, creating projectile points for hunting, scrapers for processing hides, and elaborate ceremonial objects. Some of their stone tablets are carved with intricate designs, geometric patterns, raptors, and abstract symbols we can't fully interpret. Were these maps? Religious symbols? Clan identifications? We don't know. Copper working was particularly advanced. The Adena didn't smelt copper, they used native copper, pure metallic copper found naturally in the Great Lakes region. They cold hammered it into sheets, then cut and shaped it into beads, bracelets, finger rings, and breastplates. Some copper pieces show they understood annealing, heating and cooling the metal to make it easier to work. One of the most remarkable aspects of Adena culture is what their grave goods tell us about connections across vast distances. These weren't isolated people living in one valley. They were part of a continent-wide network of exchange and interaction. Let's map this out. Copper came from the Great Lakes region, particularly the Keweenaw Peninsula in what's now Michigan, over 500 miles north. Marine shells, both welt and conch shells, came from the Gulf Coast, over 1,000 miles south. Mica, a glittering mineral that splits into thin, transparent sheets, came from the Appalachian Mountains to the east. Some artifacts contain materials that traveled even farther, though less common in Adena than in later Hopewell sites. How did these materials move? We're not talking about individual Adena traders walking 1,000 miles to the Gulf Coast and back. The exchange was more complex. Materials moved through chains of reciprocal relationships, probably over generations. A community might trade with their neighbors 50 miles away, who traded with their neighbors another 50 miles away, and so on, creating networks that spanned the continent without any single person traveling the full distance. What did the Adena trade away to get these exotic materials? We can only speculate, because organic materials rarely preserve. Likely candidates include processed foods, textiles, furs and hides, medicinal plants, and probably social obligations, marriages, alliances, shared ceremonial participation. These weren't just economic exchanges. Anthropologists distinguish between trade and exchange. Trade is purely economic, while exchange carries social and symbolic meaning. When an Adena leader was buried with Gulf Coast shells and Great Lakes copper, those objects represented relationships, stories, and connections, not just wealth. The existence of these networks tells us something profound about Adena society. They had surplus production, enough food and goods that some people could specialize in craft production and travel. They had social structures that maintained relationships across hundreds of miles and probably multiple languages and cultures. They had shared symbol systems. Certain objects carried meaning that people across vast territories could recognize and understand. This wasn't unique to the Adena. Indigenous peoples across North America maintained similar networks for thousands of years. But the Adena were among the first to leave clear archaeological evidence of these connections at such a scale. Around 100 BCE, something changed in the Ohio River Valley and beyond. The Adena culture didn't disappear suddenly. Cultures really do. Instead, they transformed, elaborated, and expanded into what archaeologists call the Hopewell culture, named after Captain M.C. Hopewell, the owner of a farm where a major mound group was excavated in the 1890s. Here's what's crucial to understand. Hopewell wasn't a tribe or a nation. It was a shared cultural tradition, a way of doing things that spread across an enormous area, from the Great Lakes to the Gulf Coast, from the western edges of the Great Plains to the Atlantic seaboard. We're talking about a cultural phenomenon that influenced peoples across nearly half of what's now the United States. The Hopewell built on Adena foundations, but took everything to a new level. The mounds got bigger, much bigger. The trade networks expanded to include more exotic materials from even greater distances. The artwork became more sophisticated and diverse. The earthwork complexes became massive ceremonial centers with geometric precision. Why did this elaboration happen? Archaeological evidence suggests several factors. Climate data shows this period had relatively stable, favorable conditions for agriculture, allowing for larger populations and surplus production. The bow and arrow was introduced to eastern North America during this period, making hunting more efficient. And the Hopewell cultivated more diverse crops, particularly increasing their use of native seed crops. But there's something else, something less tangible. The Hopewell represent what anthropologists might call a horizon style, a shared set of beliefs, symbols, and practices that transcended individual communities. Hopewell ceremonialism became a unifying force, creating common ground among diverse peoples. The core of Hopewell culture remained in Ohio, particularly in the Scioto River Valley and the surrounding region. The density of earthworks here is staggering. At one point, there were hundreds of mound sites in Ross County, Ohio alone. Many have been destroyed by farming and development, but significant complexes like Hopewell Culture National Historical Park preserve remnants of this extraordinary period. Hopewell societies were more socially complex than Adena. There's clearer evidence of social hierarchy, with some burials containing massive quantities of exotic trade goods, while others have few or none. Some archaeologists suggest the Hopewell had big men, or chiefs, whose power came from their ability to organize communal projects, maintain trade relationships, and conduct ceremonies. Yet there's no evidence of warfare or fortifications during most of the Hopewell period. These weren't military empires expanding through conquest. The spread of Hopewell culture happened through attraction, adoption, and participation. Communities chose to take part in this shared ceremonial tradition.
The Hopewell didn't just build burial mounds, they created entire landscapes of sacred geometry. These weren't random placements, they were carefully planned complexes of circles, squares, octagons, and parallel walls stretching across miles of terrain, demonstrating sophisticated mathematical and engineering knowledge. The Newark earthworks in Ohio, built around 100 AD, originally covered nearly 4 square miles, making it one of the largest earthworks complexes in the world. It included a great circle enclosure, 1,200 feet in diameter, connected by parallel walls to an octagon and a square. Much of it has been destroyed by the city of Newark, but what remains is protected. The octagon and circle alone cover 50 acres. Here's what's remarkable. These geometric forms are precise.
The corners of the squares are right angles. The circles are true circles. The octagon's sides are equal length. This required sophisticated surveying techniques. Archaeological experiments show that simple tools, posts, cords, and sighting techniques could achieve this precision. But it required planning, mathematical understanding, and careful execution. What were these earthworks for? The walls weren't defensive. They're too low, typically only 3 to 8 feet high, and don't enclose defensible positions. No one lived inside them. They contained few burials. Instead, archaeologists believe these were ceremonial centers, sacred landscapes where people gathered for rituals. Recent research has revealed something fascinating. Many Hopewell earthworks have astronomical alignments. The Newark octagon is aligned with the maximum northern rising position of the moon in its 18.6-year lunar cycle. The octagon's walls create sightlines that frame this moonrise with remarkable precision. This wasn't coincidence. It was intentional astronomical observation encoded in Earth. Why the moon? For agricultural peoples, tracking lunar cycles was practical. The moon's phases helped mark planting seasons. But it was also deeply symbolic. Many Native American traditions associate the moon with fertility, renewal, and the measurement of time. The fact that the Hopewell tracked the 18.6-year lunar cycle shows they maintained astronomical observations across generations. Other earthwork complexes show solar alignments. The High Bank Works, also in Ohio, has wall alignments that mark the summer and winter solstices. These weren't just calendars. They were statements about humanity's relationship with cosmic order, about understanding and participating in the rhythms of the universe. Building these massive earthworks required enormous labor investment. Calculations suggest the Newark earthworks required moving over 7 million cubic feet of earth, perhaps 200,000 person days of labor. This means either very large populations working together or smaller populations working over many years, or both. The effort itself was probably part of the purpose. Anthropologists who studied monument building worldwide note that the act of communal construction creates social bonds, reinforces shared identity, and demonstrates collective power. When hundreds or thousands of people work together to create something that will last for generations, they're making a statement. We are a people. We exist. We matter.
The Hopewell were master artisans, creating objects of stunning beauty and technical sophistication. Their artwork ranks among the finest produced by any ancient culture in North America, and some pieces rival artwork from anywhere in the ancient world. Let's start with copper. The Hopewell took copper working far beyond what the Adena achieved. They created not just simple ornaments, but elaborate effigy pieces. Copper falcons, copper fish, copper serpents with pearl eyes, copper panpipes, and human figures. One of the most famous pieces is a copper plate, showing a human figure with elaborate ceremonial regalia, demonstrating the Hopewell could create representational art in metal. The technical skill is impressive. They cut copper sheets into intricate shapes, embossed designs by hammering from the back, and created three-dimensional forms. Some copper objects show they understood lost wax casting techniques, where a wax model is covered in clay, the wax melted out, and molten copper poured in.
though most Hopewell copper work was still cold hammering of native copper. Then there's mica. Mica is a mineral that splits into thin, flexible sheets that are transparent or translucent with a reflective quality. The Hopewell obtained mica from the Appalachian Mountains and cut it into elaborate shapes: human hands, serpent, geometric designs, even full human figures, over 3 feet tall. The largest mica pieces required sheets that were carefully matched and pieced together. Why mica? Imagine these objects in ceremonial contexts. Mica catches and reflects light in magical ways. Held up to firelight or sunlight, it would shimmer and glow. In darkness, it would flash as it moved. For a pre-industrial society, this must have seemed almost supernatural. Earth transformed into something that captured light itself. The Hopewell created elaborate platform pipes, smoking pipes with flat bases and animal or human effigies rising from the bowl. These weren't crude carvings, they're naturalistic sculptures showing detailed anatomical knowledge. There are pipes showing hawks, bears, toads, otters, and humans. Some show such specific details that zoologists can identify the exact species depicted. One extraordinary example is the Ray figurine from the Hopewell Mound group, a small ceramic figure showing a person kneeling, possibly grinding something in a bowl. The detail is remarkable. You can see the musculature, the posture, even the person's hairstyle. It's one of the most complete human representations from this period. Stone carving reached high levels of sophistication. Hopewell artisans created stone tablets with complex geometric and naturalistic designs, often showing raptorial birds, serpents, or abstract patterns. They made stone effigy pipes and ornaments from various stone types, sometimes using materials from hundreds of miles away, specifically for their aesthetic qualities. Pearl and shell work was extensive. The Hopewell used freshwater pearls from local mussels and marine shells from the coasts to create elaborate necklaces, breastplates, and ornaments. One burial at the Hopewell Mound Group contained over 20,000 freshwater pearls. Another contained sheets of hammered copper, meteoric iron, and obsidian from the Rocky Mountains. What did all this artwork mean? Most of it was ceremonial. The objects appear in burial contexts, not as everyday items. The themes, birds of prey, serpents, transformation, duality, suggest cosmological significance. Many scholars see shamanic themes, birds representing sky realms, serpents representing earth and water, and transformation between states of being. The Hopewell interaction sphere shared these artistic styles across enormous distances. A pipe carved in Ohio looks similar to one from Illinois or Iowa. This shared visual language suggests shared beliefs, shared stories, shared ceremonial practices, connecting diverse communities.
At its height, around 200 CE, the Hopewell interaction sphere connected peoples across nearly half of North America. This wasn't an empire. There was no central government, no Hopewell emperor. It was something more subtle and perhaps more remarkable, a shared ceremonial tradition that transcended boundaries of language, ethnicity, and geography. Let's map the extent of this network. Obsidian, volcanic glass prized for its sharpness and beauty, came from Obsidian Cliff in Yellowstone, Wyoming, over 1,500 miles from the Ohio core area. Grizzly bear teeth came from the Rocky Mountains.
Shark teeth came from the Gulf of Mexico and the Atlantic coast. Galena, a lead ore used for pigment, came from the upper Mississippi Valley. Quartz crystals came from Arkansas. Shells of specific species came from the Gulf Coast and the Atlantic seaboard. In return, what flowed outward? This is harder to track because organic materials don't preserve well, but archaeologists believe it was likely finished goods, ceremonial knowledge, and social obligations. Ohio flint, particularly Flint Ridge flint, which is colorful and high quality, appears at sites across the eastern United States. Pipes manufactured in Ohio appear in Illinois, Wisconsin, and other regions. But more than objects moved through these networks. Ideas traveled. The earthwork forms, the burial practices, the artistic styles. These spread not because one group conquered another, but because communities chose to adopt Hopewell practices. This is what archaeologists call an interaction sphere, a region where peoples share and exchange cultural practices while maintaining distinct local identities. How did this system work practically? Archaeologists propose several mechanisms. Regular gatherings at major ceremonial centers would have brought people from across the region together, facilitating exchange and relationship building. Specialized traders or envoys might have maintained long-distance relationships. Marriages between communities could create kinship ties across vast distances. The Hopewell also shared technological knowledge. Craft specialists who understood complex copperworking, mica cutting, or pearl drilling probably trained apprentices, and this knowledge spread through the network. The remarkable similarity in artistic techniques across vast distances suggests artisans traveled or training systems existed. Not all regions participated equally. The Ohio core area was clearly the center, the densest concentration of earthworks, the richest burials, the most elaborate artifacts. But outlying regions developed their own local variants. Kansas City Hopewell, Merksville culture in Louisiana, Copenna culture in Alabama, each adapted Hopewell ceremonialism to their local contexts while maintaining connections to the broader tradition. Why did people participate in this system? The exchange of exotic materials created and maintained social prestige. Leaders who could access rare materials from 1,500 miles away demonstrated their connections, their power, their spiritual potency. The ceremonial centers provided neutral ground where different groups could interact, trade, and resolve disputes. The shared belief system provided common identity across diverse peoples. This interaction sphere represents something profound about human nature. Without writing, without central authority, without modern communication technology, peoples across an area larger than modern Europe maintained relationships and shared cultural practices for centuries. They did it through commitment to shared values, through reciprocal obligations, through the patient building of trust across generations.
The Hopewell interaction sphere collapsed between 400–500 CE. Mound construction ceased, long-distance exchange networks broke down, and major ceremonial centers were abandoned. The causes remain debated in archaeological literature. Paleoclimate data shows increased variability in the late woodland period. No catastrophic drought, but less predictable growing conditions. For agricultural societies operating near subsistence margins, unpredictability reduces surplus available for non-subsistence activities like monument building. Archaeological settlement pattern studies show population dispersal. Large aggregation sites show reduced occupation, while smaller, dispersed settlements increase. This suggests a shift from ceremonially focused aggregated communities
two smaller, kin-based groups prioritizing immediate subsistence. Evidence for increased conflict appears in some regions by 400-500 CE. Palisaded villages, skeletal evidence of violent trauma, and defensive site locations all increase. Competition for resources may have disrupted cooperative networks underlying Hopewell ceremonialism. The bow and arrow, introduced earlier, became widespread by 400 CE. While improving hunting efficiency, it also increased warfare lethality, potentially contributing to conflict escalation. Some researchers propose ceremonial fatigue, communities redirecting labor from monument construction to immediate subsistence as conditions became challenging. This is an economic explanation. Reduced surplus means reduced ability to support elaborate ceremonialism. The decline wasn't uniform regionally. Ohio Hopewell declined earliest by 400 CE. Some peripheral regions continued Hopewell-style practices longer. This regional variation suggests local factors were significant. The people didn't disappear. They became late woodland cultures, then late prehistoric cultures like Fort Ancient and Monongahela. Eventually, their descendants became historic Native American nations, including Shawnee, Miami, Delaware, and others. Genetic, linguistic, and cultural connections link Native nations to the ancient mound builders. When European Americans arrived in Ohio in the late 1700s, they found extensive earthworks, but no builders. Rather than recognizing indigenous achievement, many created theories attributing the mounds to non-indigenous peoples. Lost tribes, ancient Europeans, mythical civilizations. This denial of Native American achievement persisted into the 20th century. Archaeological research beginning in the 1880s, 90s, with investigators like Frederick Ward Putnam, Warren K. Moorhead, and Cyrus Thomas, established through systematic excavation and analysis that the mounds were built by ancestors of Native American peoples. This conclusion is now uncontested in archaeological literature. Today, multiple sites are protected. Hopewell Culture National Historical Park, established 1923, preserves major mound groups in Ohio. Great Serpent Mound is a National Historic Landmark. In 2023, 8 Hopewell earthwork sites in Ohio achieved UNESCO World Heritage status as Hopewell ceremonial earthworks. The Adena at Hopewell demonstrate that complex societies with monumental architecture, long-distance exchange, sophisticated art, and social stratification can develop without urbanism, writing, or state-level political organization. They represent alternative pathways to social complexity. Their earthworks endure after 2,000-plus years, documenting Indigenous American achievement, engineering knowledge, astronomical understanding, and organizational capacity. These monuments are part of American heritage, built by the ancestors of Native American nations on this land.